On Tragedy, we cover cases that involve real people and real events. Episodes may include discussions of violence, criminal behavior, and loss. We share these stories to honor those impacted and to raise awareness, but they may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. On a warm June evening in 1968, 3-year-old Jonathan John Hagans was spending time with his family at Jacksonville Beach. It was the kind of Florida summer night families remember fondly, the air thick with salt, the echo of waves under the moonlight, until in a single moment, everything changed. According to a June 13, 1968 article in The Leader, Jonathan was last seen walking along the beach with a family member at around 10 p.m., and after that, he was gone. No one saw him enter the water. No one saw him leave the beach. Despite days of searching, including support from the Navy Search and Rescue Helicopter Squadron, no trace of John was ever found. And for the Hagans family, the pain of that night has lingered for more than 5 decades. Authorities at the time believed Jonathan had drowned, but his family never accepted that explanation. To them, too much didn't make sense. And over the years, they've held on to one thing stronger than doubt: hope. Today, more than 50 years later, that hope still fuels their search for answers. In this series, we'll explore Florida's oldest missing persons case, the heartbreak, the unanswered questions, and the resilience of a family that refuses to give up. And we begin with someone who's come to know that night from the stories of his parents and siblings that have shaped his life and his understanding of what was lost. Joining us first is Joel Hagans, Jonathan's younger brother. He's here to share what life was like before that summer night, what he's learned about his big brother, and how the loss has continued to shape their family story. This is Tragedy, a true crime podcast.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Alyssa. And before we get started with our series on the oldest missing persons case in the state of Florida, Jonathan Hagans, we do have some updates that we want to give our listeners about the vigil that was held on October 6th at the courthouse in Crawfordville. So first of all, we know there was a really great turnout. So local listeners, Crawfordville, Tallahassee, thank you so much for showing up, honking your horns. There were several people there who had a sign-making event that weekend before. And I just know we have spoken to both of the families, and they're both so grateful for the increased community engagement in their stories. Also, we are aware that there were several people from local media, which is always nice to have, and then several people from the Walla County Sheriff's Office were there as well, speaking to members of the family. So it's always nice to have their continued presence at these types of opportunities.
What I thought was the most compelling for me was this wasn't just about one case anymore. We got to see 2 different families come together in a way that, I don't think they certainly have never done before. And one of the things that I want to make sure we call out is you did that. This was your idea, and I thought it was a beautiful idea. And I love the fact that they listened, they came together, they've started to build, I think you called it a coalition. Mm-hmm. And these families really depend on each other now. And I think the more we can see activity like that, the more support the community can provide. And frankly, the more pressure is put on the sheriff's office, which is exactly what we want to do.
Yeah, and we saw a visual representation of that, and one of the news outlets did a recording, and they interviewed both Cindy and Teresa standing side by side together. So, we know that it's not just them sort of talking about getting together, but they are physically getting together and creating, like I said, this coalition to, we have 2 families that have been through something that's horribly traumatic, and I know for sure for Teresa, really, she felt like she was on her own, and she's not anymore. And they have families that have come together, and now they can support each other, and they'll be friends forever now.
And I know we have a few other updates regarding the Michael John Olson case. Alyssa, do you want to go over those?
Yes, I definitely do. At the end of last week's episode, we said a little brief, short of small things about something that's coming up, and we have that put in place. So we had talked very briefly about this expertise and person we have found who does statement analyzing, and that episode will be next week.
I'm definitely looking forward to that one.
Today we are speaking with Joel Hagans, and Joel is Jonathan's younger brother, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we share the story of your brother, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm 53 years old. I live in Tallahassee, Florida. My parents moved here when I was very young, so I've been in Tallahassee all of my memorable life. I'm a business owner here in town, and I also help out with a few different charities.
And we know that Jonathan's disappearance happened before you were born, so you did not know him, but tell us what your family tells you about him.
Well, it's all positive. They said he was a very loving and caring, child. Being 3 years old, the personality probably, hasn't really fully developed, but he loved playing with his brothers and sisters. He was always happy-go-lucky, and they have nothing but fond memories of him.
Tell us about the day Jonathan disappeared. Can you walk us through that day?
Yeah, so from what I've been told, it was a family outing at the beach. They lived in Jacksonville at the time, so going to the beach was part of, their lifestyle. And they went as a group. It was my brother Joey, Jonathan, John, and my sister Susan, one of her friends, and my mom and dad. And I believe my aunt and uncle were there as well. They were there late in the afternoon. They were hanging out close to like a ramp, like a beach access ramp. You could drive on the beach at that time in Jacksonville.
Right.
And there was they call it like a snack shack. But I guess it was a very small restaurant that, served a little bit of food and drinks. I was right there on the beach. And my brother, Joey, and Jonathan, and then my sister Susan and her friend were on the beach at the end of like the access ramp, which was probably about 20 yards or so away from this snack shack. And my parents were in the snack shack, but they were there by a window so they could see the kids at the beach there. And at some point, Jonathan wanted to be with mom. The older siblings watched him walk up to the snack shack and open up the screen door and watched him walk inside. And then, they continued playing, hanging out at the beach. And then about 10 minutes later, my father came down and asked, where's John? They said, well, he went up to the restaurant. And that's when everyone started panicking, and they immediately went into search mode. There were some lifeguards close by. I believe there was like a lifeguard convention or something like that. There were several lifeguards there, more than the normal lifeguards at the beach. So they immediately were in the water, searching for him. They looked all over, and it was like he vanished in the thin air.
Outside of the lifeguards, it sounds means obviously we did a localized search. What were some of these steps that were taken immediately once we discovered he was missing?
So like within a couple of hours, from what I understand, there was like a helicopter sent up to look. Local police were immediately, involved in the search. And there was, it was a pretty big search there for a while. Immediately, everybody around, started looking for him and everything. Um, but as far as like the timeline exactly how it happened, I get conflicting stories. But it was a pretty big search right away. Um, and that was it was kind of from at one point I was told that it was the largest manhunt until Ted Bundy came along, in the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
But it was a pretty good response from the police department or the sheriff's department there. And they immediately were doing everything and trying to interview people, but nobody saw anything. The good thing, for our family is that nobody saw him going towards the water.
Yeah.
There were lots of people that said they saw him walking towards the snack shack, but nobody saw him walking towards the water. And if he was to go towards the water, he would have had to have passed my brother and sister and her friend. And obviously they didn't see him. We don't believe that he went in the water. And the initial police report, or I'm sorry, maybe not the police report, but the initial police theory was that he drowned. But there's no evidence that points in that direction. There's just speculation. A small child by the beach went missing, had to have drowned. But there's no indication of that other than theory.
It's interesting that was a theory too, because I did read that. And what I didn't know about until this conversation is there was a lifeguard convention going on at the beach. And so I'm thinking it's already slim that he could have gotten by and gotten into the water without anyone seeing him. But now with a multitude of lifeguards, I would think that would be even more of a slim chance.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen pictures of it and I've actually been to where it's at, but obviously in the time since his disappearance, that area has changed quite a bit. But there's quite a large amount of sand in between where the kids were playing and the water. So a 3-year-old wandering towards the water with nobody or anything like that, to cover that much area, I believe some adult, or even, just somebody would have noticed a 3-year-old left unattended heading towards the water. So that firms up my belief that he didn't go that direction.
No, I agree. I mean, whenever Alyssa first brought this to my attention, I used to live in that area of Jacksonville Beach. And so I'm familiar with the general area, and I know that that's a pretty broad area of beach. I mean, it's a lot of sand. And so It's not like you go directly from the back of a snack shack, 100 feet into the water. It's quite a bit more distance than that.
Right. Yeah. So I don't believe that he could have covered that much ground without somebody noticing, hey, there's a small child walking towards the water. I just don't believe that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Parents have a tendency to just kind of watch everybody's children. And I think somebody would have been like, what's going on there? And probably like gone and grabbed his hand or something like that. So
where are your parents?
Exactly.
Even if they didn't intervene, they would have, said, okay, well, I see a small child. Let me just keep an eye on him. I don't see an adult in the immediate vicinity. Let me just keep an eye on him, and if he starts to get near danger, I'll do something, even if it was that, but, no one said that they saw him towards the water. So
I have a question about this snack shack configuration, and this is just me coming from a landlocked state and not really understanding how a beach and then the stores kind of that are right there along the beach. Is there a door on the other side of the snack shack? Is it like a walk through to a road, or do we know anything about the configuration? What did it look like inside?
So I never saw it, but from the description that my brother and sister have told me, that there was a side entrance that faced the beach access ramp, and that is the entrance that he walked to. I don't know if there were any other doors, but from their description, it's a relatively small, building, probably. No one's ever given me, square footage, but from their description, sounds like it's, no more than, 1,000, 1,500 square feet at max. It was relatively small building, and it was, it wasn't like a full-size restaurant or anything like that. It was, that's why they called it a snack shack instead of, something more.
So, thank you for doing that. I was sort of thinking of like a place that has a door on the beach side and then a door on the street side, and that you could pass through and walk through. But it doesn't sound like that's the situation. There's literally one door.
There may have been more than one door, but from all of my stories that I've heard about it, they only mention the side door there. So that may be the main door, and there could be a back door for, for the workers or something like that. But that's the only door that I've ever heard mentioned.
Have there been any promising leads or tips or persons of interest over the years?
Yeah, so in the late 80s, we had someone come forward and say that he was Jonathan, and that he was kidnapped and raised as this person's own child, and that he always knew that something wasn't right, and he remembered playing with, my brothers and sisters. Um, Ended up being some sort of scam. I don't know what he was trying to scam, because we're not a family of money or anything like that. So, I don't know what his end game was, but he ended up being a foreign national, out of, I want to say, France. Um, but yeah, he did his research very well. He, convinced a lot of people, that he was who he said he was. But then when the digging got a little bit deeper, that's when they, realized he wasn't who he said he was. And that was very hard on my parents, especially my mother. She wanted to believe it, so bad, as any parent would. And, it hurt her to think that she had her son back and then not have her son back. So it was like losing him again. Um, and, she passed away in the early 90s, still looking for her son. And, my father's 90 years old, or almost 90 years old now, and he's still looking for his son as well. But that's the closest we've ever come. We've tried to open up the case. Well, we have reopened up the cold case, thanks to some help from some friends, but really haven't gotten much traction. There's a reason why it's called a cold case. The trail has, gone cold. People have passed away, or their memories aren't as sharp, or, it's so long ago they don't remember specific detail. So it's very difficult.
Do you feel like, or did the family feel like, once law enforcement kind of made the determination that he had gone into the water, that was sort of it for them, get beyond like the immediacy of the helicopters and things like that?
Yeah and no. We believe that it probably tainted their efforts a little bit, in the immediate, um, because, that if they've made up their mind, they're more looking for things to confirm their theory than they are things to disprove their theory. Um, and, so we felt like that hindered things a little bit, but we don't really blame them. We're not saying that because of that he wasn't found or anything like that. We respect the law enforcement and the job they do, and, but yeah, there's a little bit of belief that if they would have not gone so quickly to that theory, um, that we might have been better off. But we don't know that for sure, so we're not placing blame or anything.
What motivates you to keep this story active even after all these years?
Really, my family. Um, I'm the baby of eight. So we have a very large family. And they adopted me. I'm the only adopted you know sibling, and I know that they're a very loving and caring family. I shouldn't speak of them like they're not my family, but my family is very loving and caring. To bring in a child, adopt a child, and to have heard all of the stories, all of the years growing up, and how much they loved him and how much they missed him, and and their care and love for him. I feel like I try to do any and everything that I can to to help in any way that I can, because I wasn't there to help during that time. But I anytime I can talk about it with somebody like you guys, or make connections with people to bring more awareness, and do interviews or anything like that, I feel like it's my obligation to my family, and to the brother that I never knew.
And I have heard and read that this is Florida's oldest missing persons case. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate distinction,
True.
but it gives us a little bit of pride to know that we haven't given up, and we won't give up, until proven otherwise. We believe that he is still out there, and we will be reunited one day.
And how has this tragic event impacted the family?
There's so many ways that I couldn't even begin to count, but I mean, the other siblings, their lives were changed dramatically, just because imagine being the brother or sister that's still around, being raised by parents who lost one of their children. Your freedoms and your liberties are now restricted because they don't lose another one. And the parents, they're probably all in the back of their mind, what could I have done differently, and what did I do wrong? And I don't want to do anything wrong again and lose another one. So you know growing up, just speaking for myself, I couldn't do a lot of the things that my friends could do, because my parents had lost a child before. And obviously, growing up in the 70s and 80s is a little bit different than growing up today.
This is true.
But my friends had lots of liberties that I didn't have. And I'm sure my other siblings can say the same thing. After John's disappearance, it changed in that aspect. And then just to see the pain, and the sorrow in my parents, through the years, and it's it just hurts to see that in a parent, and to think that you know I I can't even begin to imagine the pain that they have gone through.
Um, that's understood. Is there anyone else other than you and the family right now that are actively involved in keeping the word out there, involved in searches? I mean, who else is out there helping you?
So in the family, I've kind of become like the spokesperson for the family. Um, I'm probably the more outgoing one in out of the siblings. So it makes it a little bit easier for me. My brother has done a couple of interviews, but he is not as outgoing. Um, so it's tough for him to do it. So I don't mind, taking on that role. But outside of the family, I've, met some people through the years, that have, been helpful and help the search. Like Paul Coley with Sin Evidence K9. I met him and shared John's story with him, and he was moved by the story, and he's helped tremendously, by putting a task force together, helped initiating getting the cold case opened again, and used his resources and his contacts to try to help as much as he can. And through my connections, I've done television interviews and radio interviews, just to raise as much awareness as I can. Our hope is, somebody listening to, a podcast like you guys, or anything else, and, says, yeah, I do remember, a blonde hair, blue eyed kid, coming into, so-and-so's family, they said they had to take him in from a cousin, or, whatever story they made up, and, they raised him as their own. And, and maybe just, say something, call the hotline, and, let the, professionals do the work after that, and see what they can find, because that's our theory that we're working with, and that's what we're hoping for. And we're hoping that one day, somebody, hears a podcast like this and speaks up, or that his DNA is entered into the database and it gets a hit, and we find him somehow, some way. I'm hoping that, before my father's time on earth is up, that we can, bring some, either reunite him with John, or have some finality one way or the other.
Yeah, and so let's let our listeners know that he was 3 when he went missing, and this was in 1968, and so he would have just turned 60 at this time.
Yeah.
Do I have the numbers right?
Yeah.
Okay. I did some quick math with how old I am and when I was born.
Very, very, very good.
So I think I got it right.
Not bad.
What else would you like to share that we possibly have not yet talked about?
I can't really think of anything else. Just like I said, we're just hoping that somebody hears it, and if they were around in that time and they saw something, and even if they don't think there's anything to it, the smallest little thing could, give, that one little nugget, to give, send investigators in the right direction. So that's what we're hoping for. At the end of the day, that's, we understand that the odds are stacked against us, in finding him, but, stranger things have happened, and we haven't given up hope.
Yeah, we've spoken to several families of people who have gone missing, and what we always encourage our listeners to do is don't decide if you think you know something, don't decide if it's important or not important, or assume that someone else shared it. Let local law enforcement make that determination. If you have any information, you remember something, you saw something, that's their job to figure out. It's your job to share it. So we will make sure that we're sharing all those important phone numbers, tip line, Jacksonville Beach Police Department information during this time, so that everybody has that information.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like I said, any small nugget, no matter how, inconsequential that you think it may be just what was needed to, point somebody in the right direction.
More than 5 decades have passed since that June night in 1968, and still no one knows what happened to Jonathan John Hagans. For the Hagans family, the years have brought more questions than answers, but also an enduring strength. If you have any information about the disappearance of Jonathan Hagans, please contact the Jacksonville Beach Police Department the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST, or submit a tip through the Charlie Project at www.charlieproject.org. Every lead, no matter how small, can make a difference. Because behind every cold case is a family still waiting, still hoping for the day when their story finally finds an ending. Thank you for listening and for honoring Jonathan's story with us. Be sure to follow this series for continued updates as we explore new details, interviews, and insights into Florida's oldest missing persons case. We hope you'll join us next time.